Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I am pleased to welcome to the Union the hugely inspirational Lord Bird. Lord Bird is a social entrepreneur and life peer, best known for co-founding The Big Issue, a magazine aimed at helping the homeless and vulnerably housed. He's going to speak for a little, then I'm going to ask him some questions, and finally we'll open it up to the floor. So please join me in giving him a very warm welcome to the building.
Can you fill up, darling? I shouldn't say darling. Sorry, a joke then.
Absolutely. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Sorry, I've got... I shouldn't tell you this, but I've got temporary teeth. And you put glue on, and you've got to take a lot of water. But you don't have to worry about that for about another 50 years. So anyway, God bless. Nice to meet you all. My name is John Bird. In 2001, it was 10 years after the launch of The Big Issue, and I was asked by a person who, the Sunday Times, they asked me, they said, John Bird, for the last 10 years, you've been running this homeless magazine. You've worked with homeless people all over the world, in Africa, in America, in Australia, in Japan, and in Taiwan and Korea. So you've done that for 10 years. So what are you going to do for the next 10 or 20 years? And I said, well, the interesting thing is that for the last 10 years, I've been mending broken clocks. That meant working with people who were screwed up, people who had tremendous problems, people who were harmed and were self-harming. But for the next 10 or 20 years, I was going to try and prevent the clocks breaking. So I was going to move into prevention, and I was going to move into cure. Virtually all of the money that is spent in and around poverty and homelessness and social deprivation and social failure is spent on the emergency. So what happens is somebody falls into the emergency of poverty, and then somebody comes along, or not, whether it's the government, whether it's a charity, or whether it's an individual, and they'll say, oh, how can I help you? So that is responding to the problems of people who, in a sense, are born or very quickly assume the position of being in need. Sorry, I've put on too much glue. You should have a little thing here, shouldn't you?
You should.
For people with dodgy teeth. I'm going to put that there. There's nothing in it, there's just water. Anyway, so here I was. I'd started the most exciting and phenomenally really interesting post-war social intervention, much, much more deep-seated in its attacks on poverty and homelessness. But after 10 years, I kept saying, what am I doing? I am just an ambulance driver. I'm just going out and trying to help people who have fallen onto hard times. There must be more to life than that. I'll just give you a thumbnail sketch of who I am. I'm a 78-year-old geezer. I was born just after the Second World War to a London Irish family in the slums of Notting Hill. It had the highest infant mortality rate than anywhere else in Britain at the time. So if you actually wanted to kill your children, move to Notting Hill, because they had a very distinct chance of actually not being very well and passing on. And that really was slum London after the 1935-45 war. Sorry, this mouth of mine will quieten down a minute. Anyway, so I was born there, born to a London Irish family who weren't very, very good at looking after the pounds. They had 6 children when they'd had them, when they finally finished. They were always hiding from the landlord. They spent more money in the pub and on cigarettes than they should have. And it was a really screwed up family. At the age of 5, I was made homeless along with my family. 6, 7, put into a Catholic orphanage, brought up by a load of nuns who had to handle hundreds and hundreds of broken children from the slums of London, all of them Catholic. And they were not a very happy bunch of people, and they had to deal with these people. So there wasn't much TLC, there wasn't much tender love in all of this. I came out at the age of 10. I was a complete and utter nutter. I was stealing. I was fighting in school. I wasn't going to school. I was daubing swastikas on things. I was breaking things down. I was setting fires. I'd been made mad by 2 things. One, being born into a mad world of poverty where there was no common sense. People were destroying themselves in front of me. My parents were destroying themselves in front of me. And I had no understanding. I mean, I think I was a bright little geezer. And I thought, am I allowed to swear? Only one swear word. I thought, what the f*** are they up to? What are they doing? They're doing so many mad things. Anyway, then the orphanage, then I was in and out of boys' courts and prisons and all sorts of things like that. And at the age of 15, I left school. I'd left school a year before because they barred me from school because I used to hit teachers. If teachers hit me, I would hit them. And they didn't like that. So, at the age of 15, I had a number of jobs. I had about 9 jobs in about 6 weeks. There was no way that John Anthony Joseph Bird, me, was going to work for a living. I was going to steal. I was going to become a ponce. That means live off other people. I was going to do anything other than join the British working class and go out every morning at 6 and work. I was way above that. Unfortunately, I got done for receiving money under false pretenses and got 3 to 5 years in a boys' institution, ran away from there, smashed up a car, got put in a boys' prison, learned to read and write properly in a matter of a few weeks. The age of 16, I could read and write, and that suddenly changed the trajectory of my life. So then I went back to this institution, and they said to me, what do you want to do with your spare time? I said, I want to draw, paint, and do creative stuff, and read books. And they encouraged it. I came out 2 years later. I had an enormous portfolio. I lived just off the King's Road in Chelsea. I walked up to my Chelsea School of Art with this enormous portfolio, and they took me in because I was brilliant. I was absolutely brilliant. I was devoted to art. And it was wonderful. I went to art school. I did very well. Everybody treated me as though I was a god. Then, unfortunately, I met a young woman. I was just telling somebody earlier, I met a young woman, a young girl. I was 18 and she was 16. We met in a lift and I made her pregnant, not in the lift. Then had to marry her. Then my art world fell to pieces. I got married because I was a good Catholic. married and then got into more and more trouble, and then spent the next 5 years hiding from the police because I'd done all sorts of things. I also had inherited the mind-forged manacles of poverty. Poverty is a mind. Poverty changes you. Poverty turns you into doing things that you would not do if you had not been born into poverty and if you had not been troubled and hurt by poverty. It turns you into murdering people. It turns you into sticking knives in other people. It turns you into all sorts of things. Poverty and need and having around you people who don't add up, who don't make sense, whose lives don't make sense, and who are themselves depressed and in need. So, along with it is racism. I was brought up to not like black people or Indians or Jews or Arabs or even English people. We were taught not to like anybody. The only decent people in the world were the Irish, and they had to be Catholic. So those mind-forged manacles, you imagine I'm a relatively bright, clever, self-educating, into art, knowing the difference between Cimabue and Giotto, knowing all sorts of stuff about the Trecento, the Quattrocento, the Cinquecento, all the stuff that I taught myself, reading a thesaurus rather than a novel. I was a really bright geezer, but every now and then I would say something about Jewish people or black people or Indian people, because that's the fertile ground I came from, which I think is poverty. This doesn't mean to say that every poor person's a racist, but certainly in the world that I came from, they were definitely racist or prejudicial. I had to hide from the police at the age of 21 because they were wanting me to help them with their inquiries, which is a euphemism for saying they wanted to arrest me and put me away for a few years. So I ran off to Paris, and I met a haute bourgeois Marxist, a very, very posh Marxist girl who, whenever we talked about the crisis, she would slap my face and say, "You piece of imperialist shit," and have a right go at me. And after 3 months, I became a raving international revolutionary, a Marxist, an anti-racist. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I was taller. I'd got rid of my racism, and I'd got rid of my chauvinism and my homophobia and all the things that I'd grown up with. It was absolutely brilliant. And I came back to England when I started talking to my family. "Oh, piss off, you've joined the middle classes. I had nobody. The people I grew up with, they're all racist. My family were racist. I was isolated, more isolated than at any other time in my life, even than when I was in the orphanage. I was totally and utterly, I joined a revolutionary group, and they were all middle-class people who had been to Oxbridge, and they were all people who had degrees or almost had degrees and all that. And the one common denominator in this revolutionary Marxist group was that their parents didn't like their children. It was very strange meeting all these really displaced people, and they couldn't take me. What the hell was I? I was a working class boy who didn't quite speak like them and had no understanding what Marx was. Marx was a hidden philosopher. I was there for emotional reasons. I was there because Marx said things like we were all kind of equal. So anyway, is this all right? You join this? Do you want a joke? Do you want a joke? I've only got 2 jokes. Are you all right? Yeah. So, get ready. I thought you were going to get up and go. No, I only have 2 jokes, and I'd use these to test people's intelligence. If you don't understand them, then you're as thick as arseholes. Anyway, sorry, I joke. There's a guy, I was told this by a Liverpudlian, there's a guy who rushes into a shop, and he says to the manager, he says, manager, where's your camouflage jackets? And the manager says, they're good, aren't they? Isn't that brilliant? That was a guy called Ken Dodd. And I interviewed him. He's dead now. He was the longest lasting comedian on British television. And I said, can I use that joke? And he said, yeah, you'll have to give me a joke. So I said, did you know that they're doing a Liverpool version of Silence of the Lambs? And he said, what's that? And I said, shut up, yous. Now, if you know Liverpool, they'll all say that, shut up, yous, which is Silence of the Lambs. Anyway, so I prefer his joke to mine. So anyway, so I became a Marxist, a lonely Marxist. And I would do all sorts of things like do my washing, my clothes in the middle of the night so I could sleep in the all-night laundromat. I was a really displaced human being. Anyway, I got a job washing up through the night and left the revolutionary group, met another haute bourgeois. Well, this is coming out, isn't it? I never met another haute bourgeois young woman who, in the end, married me, and she had a bit of money, and you know what money does to people with no money. Anyway, we got married, we had 2 children. I'd already had a daughter and all that stuff, and I was always in and out of trouble. I'd go into pubs and I'd cause grief. I was always looking to have a go at somebody or something like that. And this went on throughout my 20s and my 30s. I started a print company and I became very successful in the times of Margaret Thatcher because I was obsessed with printing, and I'd learned some of this printing when I was banged up. I'm probably going on a bit too long about who I am, but no one's walking out yet. So anyway, then at the age of 39, 40, I thought, I've been through so much shit. I've been through so much problems. I've self-harmed. I've been a drinker and a drug user and a rough sleeper, and there must be something I can do with this. And about the time of when I was about 40, 41, I was watching the television and I saw a guy on the television who, with his wife, used to run the Body Shop. I don't know if you know of the Body Shop. It's kind of disappeared now. But I knew this bloke when I was hiding from the police in Scotland. And lo and behold, I got hold of him. We became friends. He went to America, the Body Shop, because they had shops all over the place. He saw a guy walking down the street selling a copy of a paper called The Street News. He fell into conversation with him. The bloke said, I come from Brownsville, which is where Tyson comes from, and nobody gets out of Brownsville without a criminal record or if they're a sportsman. And this guy Gordon Roddick, said, I know what, we'll start a street paper in London in 1990. He brought it back, he spoke to all of the charities, he got his own charity to look at it, and it wasn't working, it wouldn't work. Then he came to me and he said, John, you've been a rough sleeper, you're an ex-offender, you're mad as arseholes, you're a bit like the people who were on the streets. Why don't you start a street paper? And that's how the big issue started. Anyway, that's me. I should add that after the 10 years, 2001, I wanted to prevent clocks breaking rather than I wanted to do prevention and cure. I then started to work with people on the basis of that. In 2012-13, I started to apply to join the House of Lords as a crossbencher. And the reason for that is because I realised that everybody was saying, John Bird, what's so great about you? You've built this international movement. You're a brilliant geezer. You're like a beautiful butterfly. And they'd pat me on the back and invite me places and put me on television and all that stuff. Get me to write my autobiography for Penguin and all that stuff. And I kept thinking, they keep telling me that I know how to think outside the box because the box isn't working. And it was then I said, I'm going to get in the box. And the box is Parliament. There is something, anybody over the age of 23 or 21 can apply to become a peer in the House of Lords, what they call a crossbencher. And I applied. And after about 3 or 4 occasions, they let me in. And I became the Lord Bird of Notting Hill, where I came from. And when I went in and people said to me, the BBC were making a film about my first year in the Lords. And they said to me, the journalist said to me, why did you go into the House of Lords? It's a very strange place because it's full of strange, a lot of people sitting around scratching their arse, not doing anything. Why would you want to join a load of old fogies? Old fogies who influence law and when they woke up could be very useful. And I said, and being a very theatrical person, I pulled out an imaginary knife and I went up to the interviewer and I went, to slit the throat of poverty. And she went, oh. And I dropped the imaginary knife with all the blood on it. It didn't make the shop floor or what, it ended up on the cutting room floor. But I went into Parliament to destroy poverty. I've been in Parliament 8 years. I'm still banging away. I'm trying to get the government to do something which is never, ever done. Every government, irrespective of who gets into office, every government has 8 government departments dealing with the problems of poverty. So you get a bit here and a bit there and a bit here and a bit there. They never, ever try and converge their energies to get rid of poverty. So what we've got is a parliament made up of 2 houses, and most of them have got their heads somewhere dark. They are a part of the problem, not a part of the solution. Everybody loves a new initiative. People are coming to me almost daily, hourly sometimes. John, I've just started this new initiative and I'm working over here. And I'm saying, when I went into the House of Lords, I had all these peers and all these members of Parliament saying, John, would you come down to my Parliament, to my constituency or where I live, because I want to show you this wonderful project that we've got to help the homeless. And I'd say, look, what you're doing is you're trying to make ends meet. You're trying to help the poor. And you're trying to help the poor by giving them something. I said, that's going to make you feel brilliant. It's going to make the homeless feel brilliant for a while. But you're still leaving them in homelessness. So why is there no government department? Why is there no structure in society that devotes itself to getting people out of poverty or from preventing them ending up in poverty? I was going to call my speech tonight, which I forgot about, but I've now remembered. I've even forgotten it again. What is it? I was going to call it Poverty Stinks. In fact, I was going to call it Pity the Poor for their foes are wolves and their friends are fools. What a indictment on the millions of people in the world who are struggling to help the poor get through the day, the week, the month, or the year. But not one of them says, what the is going on? Why are we not allowing the inheritance of poverty? People inherit poverty. I inherited poverty. I inherited racism. I inherited all the shit that led me to create the big issue. I was made mad by that world. Fortunately, I've been able to use my madness for social good. We are run by a confederacy of dunces. Unfortunately, America with its election, Trump is a dunce. We know that. But you know why he's there? Because of all the other people who failed again and again and again. All the Clintons, all the Bushes, all the Obamas, all the Bidens, they failed again and again and again of not addressing themselves to how do we stop people inheriting poverty and then spending 99 times out of 100 on a particular trajectory that takes them to a pauper's grave. No one has done it. This university, the one across the country, they're all conspiring to do more of the same. And actually, we're at a time in life, in the history of this world, we haven't got time to do more of the same. We haven't got time to, cheerio, have a nice evening. Don't drink too much. We have no time. This is the most pressing thing. The most pressing thing is, where do we get the thinking to not spend 40% of government expenditure on maintaining people in poverty? Our streets in London and other places are full of people who are hurting each other, poor on poor crime. This comes from poverty. They wouldn't be doing it if they went to the University of Manchester or Liverpool or, where are we, Cambridge. They wouldn't be doing it because they would not be finely honed to socially fail and to suffer all of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that are thrown at people in poverty. Until this government or the next government comes together and starts helping us to prevent people falling into poverty. When I was a racist, when I hated black people, Jewish people, Indian people, everybody, it was the payoff that goes with poverty, a closing down of the mind. When are we going to stop people inheriting poverty? I work with people all over the world. I can swear on my life, especially in the metropolitan countries, in America and in Europe and in the UK, they all seem to come from the same social group. They come from the people whose parents were poor. And until we put our minds on getting rid of inherited poverty, we're not going anywhere. What time-wise? What? What?
Yeah, I'd like to take some questions from there, and I can open it up to the floor.
I wanted, sorry, I just wanted to...
no, not at all.
Just wanted to finish up on one other thing.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Oh, where are we? I'll put that there.
Okay.
Anyway, just wanted to end up on the fact that what I've said to you is in a very thumbnail sketch, very limited, what I think the problem is with education and the problem with the political system that we have. I speak as a person who comes from deep-rooted poverty, from many, many generations, Irish poverty. You've got to remember Ireland was where England practiced its imperialism. It was where they honed all the things. How do you divide and rule? How do you not worry about whether people live or die, no long as you have a chaise longue at home or whatever? So they did all that. And I come from that tradition. So when I get into a position of power, if you can call being in the House of Lords power, I have to look at myself and I say, why is it that there are so many people obsessed with helping the poor just to get by? Why do we love food lines or food banks? We fucking love them. People get really excited about them. We need them. I'm not saying get rid of them. We have to carry on helping people in need. But we also have to say, when are we going to turn the tap off? And that's not happening. So I'd just like to say, I'm as mad as arseholes. I'm a coping nutter. But I'm here to say we have to think differently. And that's the only reason why I've come along here today. I'd also like to take up a charity. I'd like to take up a collection because I want to build a nice holiday home for myself. Sorry, I'm joking. Anyway, God bless you all. Thank you. Oh. Sorry, my sticky teeth are clearing at last.
So, thank you so much. I thought we'd just briefly go back to the start. I won't take up too much time on my questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So you say you were raised in the post-war slums of London, stints of homelessness, time in jail, learning to read and write by the age of 16. Did you think that your trajectory, as it happened, co-founding the Big Issue, and now regularly reading and making speeches in the House of Lords, did it ever seem something that was possible?
No, the wake-up, the two things the two really magic things in my life have been when I realised that I couldn't be a racist anymore because I began to understand about the world at the age of 21 and get rid of my anti-Semitism and all that. And that was, that I thought, yeah, that's beautiful. And I didn't know many of my contemporaries going along that road. So I thought, I can become an anti-racist, which I did, but I became one of those horrible anti-racists who were as thuggish as the people that you're fighting against. So I was always getting in trouble with the police and all that stuff. But that was a real thought, I can do something with my life. And then the big one was when I got to the age of 40, when I'd been a successful printer, I had 3 children, and things were not working for me because I was going out, still getting drunk and having fights in pubs and, sleeping rough even at that age. And I thought, there must be more than I can do. So those 2 things informed me. And when I got the chance to start a street paper, The Big Issue, because I met somebody with a shed load of money who I'd known when I was young, it kind of worked. But those were the 2 real big things. And when I got to 40, I thought, I bet you I can make a mark in the world for the people I come from and the people who are suffering what I suffered. But I never had any plans. And being in the House of Lords is a very strange affair because you're there with some people who are absolutely useless and some people who are very useful. And I wouldn't divide it on the basis of whether they are, hereditary peers. One of the best peers I knew in the Lords, and he's unfortunately retired through exhaustion, spent all of his time trying to help young children leaving care, local authority care, get them into the community. Absolutely brilliant guy. So actually some of the hereditary peers are better than the life peers, people like me. So when you get in and you realise that you can make some difference, but my big thing is, unless I get the government to stop the scattergun effect, 8 different government departments working on poverty, and every government saying, we've got this initiative, and it never turns into anything mainstream.
So it's been 33 years since you
33
founded
years.
The Big Issue.
Last September.
Oh, wow. And so you talked a little bit about what it was that sparked it. It was that incident that encounter in New York.
Yes, I should have said that in London alone, there were 6,000 people sleeping rough in the centre of London in 1991. That's unbelievable. 6,000 people. They're not 6,000 people now, but we are going back to very, very difficult times. And the thing is that now you have the spreading of homelessness. You didn't have much homelessness in Cambridge 30 years ago, but now you've probably got 120 people who would fall into the category of being homeless, rough sleeping, sometimes not, sometimes begging and all that sort of stuff.
So when establishing the Big Issue, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? And I guess, what were you hoping to do that was different to what traditional models of charities were doing at the time?
Oh, the biggest challenge was not from the homeless. The homeless were largely, at that time, there was a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs. And there was a lot of violence. We had to be violent to people who were violent to us. So we had to protect ourselves. But the biggest problem was the homeless organisations who said, why would you want to give a homeless person money to spend because they've been selling the Big Issue? Why would you give them money? Because you know what they're going to do. They're going to drink it or put it in their arms or up their noses. You're only helping them to harm themselves. And I said, because I'd done that, I'd been on the streets, I'd been a beggar. I was an incredibly successful beggar. Bloody brilliant one. In fact, I should still be doing it. I used to beg in Scotland, and of course, if you went up to someone in Scotland and said to them, excuse me, I've fallen on hard times, they say, piss off. So I had to go, sorry, pal, I've fallen on hard times, there's only chucks you. So you have to learn a different way of presenting yourself. But the thing was, so I said there was a big group, there's about 80 of these homeless organisations all coming together to blow me away. And they said, you're giving money to people who are going to spend it on drugs. And I said, there are people living in your hostels who are using drugs and who are, having drink. We know that. At the moment, they're robbing old ladies. They're robbing young people. They're breaking into shops. They're shoplifting. They're selling their bodies. Rent boys and rent girls. What I want to do is decriminalise them so that the only person they harm is themselves rather than general public. Because if I decriminalise them, I get the chance then of maybe moving them on to something that isn't so self-harming. It's a really hard job, and it's been hard for the last 30 years because government doesn't give you money for rehab and, detox and rehab and supportive therapeutic communities. But these people were saying, don't give money to the poor because they'll spend it wrong. But at the same time, these were people committing crime. When I went to Los Angeles, where we did the paper there, Sheriff Parks, who was the top guy, a very large black guy who didn't like me, and he said to me, he used the mother F all the time at me, saying, here you are coming from England, trying to help our homeless people. We've got hundreds of people trying to help homeless people. Can't you just get out of the way? I said, well, I'm trying to do something different. He said, what are you trying to do? I said, well, I'm trying to give the homeless the chance that every Hollywood movie star has when they want to score drugs. When they want to score drugs, they ring their dealer. The dealer comes around and they give them money. They don't have to murder anybody. They don't have to stab anybody. They don't have to rape anybody and steal their money. They don't have to sell their bodies. They don't have to sell their imagination or whatever you do. I want to give the homeless the chance of having enough money so that if they're harming anybody, they're harming themselves. They're not harming anybody else. And you can do, when you decriminalise people, you bring them into a different public space. And the Deputy Parks, I became his greatest friend. He was a very large guy, and he kept hitting me on the back. I said, all right, you're my mate. Yeah, off. He said, you're brilliant. And he helped us. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Anyway, sorry.
So I was just going to, off the back of that, so you know, with the big issue, you ventured into journalism, and I was just wondering what influence you think journalism has over public perceptions of homelessness and poverty, and what, if any, responsibility you think the media has in shaping those perceptions.
Well, I think there's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde thing about the media, because the media is either crying over the poor or they're asking them to move on. You know, they're saying, oh, look, this is happening. And it's nearly always divided, you know, there's the Mail on one side and there's the Guardian on the other side. And they don't, you know, describing the poorest and the homeless as terrible victims, which they are, but not taking into account the damage that their victimhood has done to them. So don't treat them as though they're little tin gods. And you get those people who treat homeless people as though they're, you know, the living truth. And then you get the others who don't. I'll tell you an interesting story. I got phoned by a leading Daily Mail news reviewer, journalist, and a very, very snotty sort of chap who's very, very well known, and he's often on the television and on the radio. And he said, Mr. Bird, he said, you bring all these Romanians into the country. I said, I don't. I said, I've never brought a Romanian in. When they're here, I'll work with them because I want to make sure that they don't get into trouble. Oh, yes. He said, did you read in the paper that a Romanian man sold a paper in Norfolk to a blind woman, and when she opened her wallet, he put his hand in and stole £50. What do you think about that? Don't you think that's disgusting? I said, well, what's interesting was that Morrison's, who had filmed this and had arrested the guy, rang us up and said, what do we do with him? We said, bring the fucking police in and throw him out at the other end. We can't have people who are destroying the reputation of homeless people and of other hard-working Romanians. And he said, oh, yes. I said, are you interested in Romanian stories? He said, yes, very interested. I said, here's a nice Romanian story. In Bath, a woman's down by the river. She's pushing a pram. The pram and her fall into the river. A big issue vendor, a Romanian, pulls off his jerkin, jumps from the bridge into the water, saves the child, and saves the woman, and then, because it's coming up to Christmas, so it was very cold, he went off back to Romania for Christmas. I said, you interested in that story? No, not at all. Put the phone down. Now, you ask about the press. If I went to The Guardian and said, look, there's this story about a Romanian big issue vendor stealing £50 from the blind woman, would you publish? No. Because they're left-wing and liberal, and they only want to see the world through rose-coloured glasses. But if I said to them, what about the river, the person in Bath falling in the river? Oh yes, love that. So that, in my opinion, is this kind of divide. They're both illusions. The truth is, it's dirty, it's smelly, it's awful being homeless. And one of the worst things about it is you don't know what the afternoon is going to bring, let alone the next hour. And when people go on about homelessness destroys you. You will live shorter than anybody else. Rough sleeping is a killer. And a lot of people who do rough sleep do it, from my experience, is because they don't want to go into hostels, because hostels are not safe. And the homeless organisations don't guarantee that the people who go into the hostels are going to be safe in there. I would never stay in a hostel when I was a young rough sleeper in my early teens and 20s. Anyway, so I hope I answered the question. I probably didn't, but sorry.
No, you did.
So you're not paying, are you?
You also earlier emphasised the kind of inheritance of poverty. I think the phrase you used was mind-forged manacles.
Yeah.
Can you just, I guess, expand a little bit on what you mean by that, the sort of psychological aspect of it, as well as the, like, situational?
Well, I mean, this doesn't go for... I mean, I've met some really noble poor people. And I'm going to make a kind of geopolitical point here. When I went to Africa or worked in the Far East, I would meet people who were homeless, who were poor, because of circumstances which are just beyond, kind of weather or whatever, reversals in economic situation. And I would meet people, if you go to Africa, you meet poor people who will take a Coca-Cola tin and turn it into a toy. They have a lot of inventiveness. And they have a sense of their own dignity and ability. But what's happened in the advanced capitalist countries, where we have a working class which was created in order to feed the mills in the 18th century, the 19th century, the factories and the mills, we have a deracinated group of people who are broken. Deracination means broken from your roots. We are the British working classes are the furthest from nature. We have no relationship with nature. We haven't had it for hundreds of years. We've lived in slums, even if we worked in the country, it was working as, agricultural slaves in appalling conditions. And therefore what you get is you get this kind of inheritance of poverty, which in my opinion is very much to do with the traumas of the past. I didn't used to believe in inherited traumas. But I began to realize that there are many, many people who are kind of screwed by what happened to their families 100 years ago, 200 years, 3 years ago. I mean, all the thing in Gaza and Israel is two lots of traumas. History working itself out, all these sorts of things. And I really do believe that inherited poverty is the most apposite way of describing the situation where a lot of poor people are poor and they don't know how to get out of it. Occasionally some arsehole like me will do it. But just because some people escape, me, Michael Caine, every now and then somebody escapes. We say, oh, it's wonderful, the system works perfectly. It doesn't work perfectly. Some will escape, some will use the grammar school or whatever. Some will have more opportunities or more skills in certain areas. But not, and in the devaluation of work. I have a brother who has been a drunk for the last 40 years. Used to be a working drunk, and now then he became a full-time drunk because he went on to Social Security. He's had a terrible life. But it's all harm, 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 inherited poverty. And now he's in a kind of coma and he can't do anything. He can't go to the toilet, he can't get out of bed, he can't feed himself. And he inherited this sense of the past dominating him. And I believe that if we're studying history, we need to use history or whatever. We need to use it as a mechanism, as a methodology for improving the people around us and our children and our children's children. That sounded almost United Nations, didn't it?
So I just have two more questions and then we'll open up to the floor. So the first one is, in the past you've been critical of short-termism in politics, a vocal advocate for preventative approaches to poverty. So looking at the recent budget and the social mobility, the recent budget and the social mobility sort of concerned areas of that. On the one hand, we've been promised £500 million to deliver thousands of new affordable houses. On the other hand, we've seen the two-child benefit cap sort of controversially kept. My question would be, do you remain convinced that this government is committed to social mobility?
I don't see how any government can be committed to social mobility or social justice or social opportunity, you know, where you could turn social security into social opportunity. I don't believe any government's capable of that. And the large reason for that is because, you know, I had the mind-forged manacles of poverty. They have the mind-forged manacles of privilege. They have, I mean, since 1892, and I'm not slagging anybody off here, but since 1892, we've had 29 prime ministers in the UK. Of those 29, 21 of them went to Oxford, 3 went to Cambridge, and the others didn't go or went to something like Warwick or Nottingham. So we have a very small pool of thinkers that we're drawing upon. And we end up with a Harold Wilson, who was a northern guy who went to Huddersfield grammar school and then got into university at Cambridge and always talked like that. And everybody thought he was a working class man. But when Oxford, when Oxbridge gets hold of you, your thinking changes. You become a different kind of, you are in some kind of enclave. And the civil service is dominated, absolutely dominated by Oxbridge. So we're always, so you've got that. So the mind-forged manacles, in my opinion, is that we are always dealing with the same gene pool who've been around for hundreds of years. There was a guy with me a few weeks ago, and he said that he'd just joined the charity board, and the charity board is to make sure that charities don't steal or do and all that stuff. There's 13 people on there. He was the only one that didn't go to Oxbridge on this board. And they are determining what is good about a charity and what is bad about it. So they're passing judgment. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus Christ, would I trust these same, Boris Johnson is only a refined version of a Harold Wilson or somebody else. They're all, it doesn't matter where you come from, the working class. People come out, I come from the working classes and I went to Oxbridge and, I say, look what it did to you. Now you're working in the Treasury and you're making an arse of things because you think things can be done the same. When you take over a government, you take over the same shape of government, same departments, same ministers, as has been done for nearly 200 years. Now, unless, and I've been advocating a Ministry of Poverty Prevention and Cure, unless you say, hang on, just taking poverty, hang on, poverty, we're not getting anywhere with this poverty. We've got millions of people who are stuck in poverty. We've got hundreds of thousands of people stuck in housing. We're not getting anywhere. And because no one's there turning the tap off. because they don't think that way. So in my opinion, this government, God bless them, I mean, I can't vote, along with people who are mentally ill and prisoners in the House of Lords. You're not allowed to vote. I can vote in the local election and all that stuff. I can't vote in the general election. But I would have voted Labour, because I've always voted Labour. But I know darn well, it's the thinking that goes with it. And you know, I give this example. If you're ill, if you've got something wrong with you, and you get up the next morning, and you've got something wrong with you, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next week, you are zero away. You are in zero position to a cure for your illness. But the day you embrace that, and you book to go and see the doctor, and go and see the doctor, you move from 0 to 90%. Because what you're embracing is, I've got something wrong with me, and I have to do something about it. You change your thinking. I wrote about this in The Big Issue. I moved into this flat with my family, and there was this water kept running and running up in the cistern. And every day I'm going to do something. And I love water because I was born in a place where you didn't drink water because all the pipes were lead. So I didn't have fresh water until I was about 20. I'm obsessed with water, the wastage. And every day. And then one day I got up and I said, bollocks. And I got a plumber. That took me about 3 months. And I think that is when you have this, what the Marxists call a leap in consciousness. I describe myself as a Marxist Catholic, by the way, just to piss everybody off. But the thing is, it's embracing that. I don't see that in this government. I don't see it in the last government. And all I see is somebody saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to come up, we're going to build more houses for poor people. Well, or we're going to bolster up the NHS. I had an argument. There was a guy called Lord Crisp, who used to love me. He doesn't love me so much, because he spoke in the House of Lords, and he said, and he used to run the NHS England, and he said, you know, we need more doctors. And I stood up and I said, could I counter that argument? Don't you think we need less patients? He didn't like it. The NHS is full. 50% of people who use the NHS are people who are suffering for food poverty, according to the British Medical Association, the BMS or BMA. 50% of our hospitals are full of people who are suffering food poverty, which leads to all of the illnesses that are related to food. And what are we doing about it? If you want to get rid, if you want the day when the doctor goes into the office and says, Mary, how many appointments have I got today? 2, and then you can go and play golf. If you want that situation, get the doctors off your back. A healthy regime, rather than this terrible regime, then you have to go down Addenbrooke's and get the people who are suffering from food poverty. You have to try and address them, but more than anything, you have to put your efforts towards turning off the tap and turning the children who inherit poverty, like me, into sane, careful, thoughtful, educated people. That's where our universities should be going. And our colleges and everything, and our education system, and I can't see anybody doing that. That's why I reckon I'm the only real genius in Britain today. Sorry about that, I have delusions of grandeur. When I was a boy, I used to be known as Napoleon, because I looked like the boy Napoleon, and I'd go around, and for some strange reason, I do believe that I'm talking the truth, and everybody else has got their head up there, somewhere dark. Anyway, carry on.
Well, just to finish, I guess, what would you hope that your legacy, both personally and through the big issue,
Sorry?
be? What do you hope that your legacy, both personally and through the big issue, will be?
what my legacy I would like is that we reinvent thinking. And that sounds dumb as arseholes. That means we engage in the world in a different way. That means we embrace the environment while we're embracing poverty. We cannot carry on destroying the world and at the same time just creating another generation of people who live in poverty and in need. We have to start putting these things together. So I would like people to say, you know, that bloke, John Bird, he got us on the road to thinking. And if we could do that, and the first thing I would do is converge all of our energies into projects that get people out of poverty, that get people out of need and all that. I don't get that. You know, everybody's off doing their own little thing, you know, oh, fuck, man. You know, and it's kind of, you know, I'm always meeting people who've got a key to homelessness. And when you find it out, it's a key for 5 roads in Bradford or something like that. But nobody is coming up with the inoculation, you know? And the inoculation is, in my opinion, is to be found in the way that we think. And I am very, very unimpressed with the levels of thinking that you have in what is called the intelligentsia. I mean, if you look at the, can I just talk about the election? I mean, as I said earlier, I watched America disappear up its own rear. Trump is really just what you get. You reap what you sow. You know, and the geopolitical stuff that's going on at the moment, you know, with Russia and all that sort of stuff. I mean, as an ex-Marxist, I was always aware of the fact that the Soviet Union was something special. I mean, it killed as many people as the fascists and all sorts of things. But I was always aware of the fact that it was an attempt at doing something. And I was always aware that if it fell to pieces, we shouldn't be treading all over it and all that. And what actually happened when the Soviet Union fell to pieces, Wall Street flew in, created all those oligarchs, because oligarchs, the only reason they work is because they trade, and they nearly always trade with the West. So you had this kind of raiding and laughing at the Soviet Union. And I knew that at some stage they would kind of wake up to this, and they would want to be revanchist. You know, they'd want to go back to a time when their pensions were paid, when they felt, because they were heroic, they were the ones that destroyed the Nazis. It wasn't the Americans and the British. 80% of all war, all battles was between the Nazis and the Red Army. We did this little bit here and a bit there and all that, but that was all the big thing. And so you know, Russia is frightened of Europe. What's his name? Napoleon. Then the Crimean War with the British just coming in and all that. And then Hitler himself. And they have no natural borders. I'm telling you something that I'm not the only person saying. They have no natural borders. So they want a buffer between us and them. And what America and Britain and everybody else and the European is dismantling that sense. And because Ukraine wants to be in Europe, great, why shouldn't they be in Europe? But somebody has to convince the Soviets, the former Soviets, that actually they're going to be safe. We're not using this as another invasion tool. There's all sorts of stuff. And when you look at America and you look at the way, I'll tell you one story. When I worked in the United States, one of my supporters was Levi Jeans. They used to take an ad in my paper called Off the Wall. It was a wonderful street paper. And they used to take an ad. And they would always say, John Bird, we want you to come with us to Tennessee, where we've got all these factories. This is in the mid-90s. We've got all these factories, and we've got schools, we've got hospitals, we've got everything. We've got food, housing, and all sorts of things, and everything. We've got this. This is Levi's. We built this ideal community, and they make our jeans for us. So I couldn't get there because I was busy. And then about a year, 2 later, I was in San Francisco, and I said, excuse me, I'm here. I can go next week. And I went, there's no point. I said, why? So we've closed the factories. We're now doing our Levi's in China. So they were destroying the prosperity of people who'd had prosperity since the Second World War. And those are the people, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, those are the people who voted for Trump. I know a lot of Trump's supporters, and I can tell you that virtually all of them are saying America has been stripped. Now, it could be a load of lies, it could be a load of cheating, it could be all sorts of things, but you reap what you sow. And unfortunately, the Obamas and I cried when Obama got in. I cried, and everybody, I was at a party with a load of people, we were all crying. But he didn't do anything about the increasing povertyization and the destruction of the middle classes and the industrial working class. He didn't do, and I don't think he had a chance of doing it because they don't do it the right way. And everybody since then. So, as far as I'm concerned, we have to face up to geopolitical issues, and we have to face them by, first of all, understanding what the hell is going on. I'm not looking forward to the next Trump 4 years. And the old bastard is as old as me. There you are. These 78-year-olds, they cause a lot of grief,
And on that note, I think we'll turn to audience questions.
Any questions?
Has anybody got any questions?
Cheerio. There's a collection box at the back.
Yeah, should we go right here? Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Bird. I'm very interested in your personal story because it sounds very inspiring to me. So, you got lost, you're certainly confused at a certain time in your life. So when and how did you find a sense of purpose or meaning of life? And what is it? And also, what are some of the life lessons you could give to young people like us? Thank you.
Oh, God. I'm never very happy with those kind of, what's the purpose? I started off as a devout Catholic. Then I became a racist. Then I became an anti-racist. And then I became a Marxist. And then I became a small businessman who worked with people in need. And I look upon myself as a businessman because I give people the chance of making their own money so that they can morph their way from poverty. I don't have any really big inspirations. I'm inspired by myself. And I always say to people, Jesus Christ, the first person you've got to be inspired by is yourself. Because you've got to look at yourself, because we are all unique individuals, and I don't say that the way Ronald Reagan would say it. I mean we are all unique individuals. There's something quite wonderful about us, and there's also something which is quite painful. We do things that we think, why the hell do we do that? And we're troubled. Sometimes we're depressed. Sometimes we're elated. We're not great thinkers. I don't think the human being, which is described as the thinking being, always thinks. And I think the first thing you have to learn to do is reflect on yourself. And I think you've got to learn to cut yourself a bit of slack. Really, that's the important thing, because if you load your life with a number of judgments, you're never going to get it right. when I was a boy and I was a serious Catholic, I was also shoplifting and stealing bikes and stealing cars and all that stuff. So I had a kind of inconvenient form of, religion. Sorry, a convenient form of religion, because it meant I could still be an arsehole. But the point is, when I fell in love with myself, because I realized I had had so much harm done to me, and I'd done so much harm to myself. I'd harmed the people around me. I'd harmed my girlfriends or boyfriends or, and all that stuff. I'd harmed, strangers by having an argument within the pub and then hitting them with my head or something like that, or throwing a drink over them. I harmed, and it was when I kind of said, I kind of learnt to fall in love with myself. And I say this, I meet people who are incredibly depressed, and they'll tell me a litany of things, why they are depressed, and they never tell me any of the reasons why they themselves are a unique individual with skills and abilities. We are, I think we're only using 20% of that's upstairs. So I would say my wife, I've got my 2 young children here. I've been married 3 times. I always say I'm a very good Catholic because I always marry my pregnant girlfriends. And my third wife, I wouldn't say my current wife, because when I say that, she calls me her first husband, which is a bit embarrassing. But my wife often says to me, "You love people, don't you?" And I do. I absolutely love meeting people, even the people who don't like me. And the reason for that is because I cut myself slack about myself. I know I talk too much. If you follow me around the House of Lords, I had a guy who left working with me, exhausted, because we'd walked from one part of the House of Lords to the other, which would normally take 2 minutes, and it could take an hour, because I'd be talking to the cleaners, I'd be talking to the police officers, I'd be talking to the clerks, talking to the MPs and all that stuff, and always talking about something which is about community and belonging and all sorts of things like that. But I reckon, what's your name? James. I reckon, James, you're a pretty brilliant person, but you're not, at the moment you think you're not, and you will be. And actually getting a degree and leaving here is only the first step. You've got to fall in love with yourself. And then even if you end up having jobs that you don't like, you then have to extract. I'll tell you one story, sorry. We helped start a street paper in San Diego. And I went down to the place, and it was run from a house. And it was down by the freeway, and there was a for sale sign. And I said, "Oh, are you leaving?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Why?" They said, "The noise of the freeway." So they were leaving a perfect house because of the noise of the freeway. So I said, "Well, why don't you just look at it a different way?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I listened to it, and it could be a fast-flowing stream." So I said, if I was living here, I would look upon that noise as a fast-flowing stream. Anyway, I went back about 6 months later, and they were still there. And I said, "Oh, what, have you decided to stay?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, I thought you wanted to go somewhere else." I said, "Yeah, we took your advice." So they'd sat down, and they'd thought of this as a fast-flowing stream. I think that's, I'm beginning to sound as though I'm, Chinese, I'm doing Zen or something, but I'm not. I do believe, you see a problem and you just start looking at it a different way. And so many minuses are pluses in hiding. If they hadn't screwed up the welfare state after the Second World War, I wouldn't be here talking to you, because they'd have sorted out homelessness and all that stuff. And, I'd be professor of Byronic studies or something like that. I wouldn't be, of course. Anyway, thank you. Any other questions?
Go here.
How are we doing for time, all right?
I think we'll take a couple more. We're a little tight on time, but I think there'll be time straight after the event as well if anybody has any in person you'd like to give. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for coming.
I was just going to ask, if you look, I mean, obviously poverty is a complex thing to
Sorry,
solve,
I'm a bit
but I was just going to ask, obviously poverty is something quite complex to solve, but when you look internationally, are there any examples at all, especially where it's not just working, like you say, on a very local level, where you've seen a particular country or region where they've done something that everybody else can learn from? I mean, are there any examples out there where you actually say that the UK or other countries should be looking at what they're doing there?
What's your name?
James, again.
James. Another James. Oh, sorry, there's a shortage of names tonight. Yeah. I mean, there are. There's one of the reasons I've been trying to advocate a Ministry of Poverty Prevention and Cure is to bring together these examples. I'll give you a wonderful example. You remember Lula? You know Lula, who runs Brazil? When he was in before, he created this thing called family allowance. And what it was that once a month, mother, these are in the barrios, you know, in the favelas, once a month, mummy got $114 on the basis of two strings. One of the mummy would go to the doctors every couple of months, because if mum falls ill, the children then go feral, and then they get into trouble, and then the Brazilian police are notorious for working at night time protecting the shops. And if they find you doing anything, they'll shoot you dead. This is children. That's not me talking. That's the UN, UNESCO. So mum has got to go to look after herself. The other thing is the children have got to go to school. Now they stopped doing this after quite a few years. It lifted 38 million people out of feral poverty. A lot of people in the West don't know the difference between exploitative poverty and feral poverty. Feral poverty is a bit like you're a meerkat and you get up every day and you say, how am I going to feed my children? You know, oh, I know what. I'll take my daughter and she can go and work in a sweatshop and make some money. Or I can put my son or my other daughter out as a prostitute or something like that. All these things. Or I can go around picking up cans, or I can... So every day you're waking up and you don't know where you're going to get the food from. That's feral poverty. Then you move into exploitative poverty, where you get $2 or $3 a day. That is stability. That's a beginning. That is a foundation. It could be. Because then you can put your children into school and all that. So what happened was 38 million people were lifted out, and it created enormous social mobility. The problem was that the newspapers and the outraged middle classes didn't like the fact that every now and then some gangster would go into a school and put a gun at the teacher's head and say, sign my child in for school, because if you don't, I'm going to kill you. And there were thousands of outbreaks of this, as you would expect. Thousands. But no comparison to the 38 million. So Lula had to close this down because of popular middle-class opinion. And I was at a conference in Glasgow, an international conference, and I used this as an example. And a whole group of Brazilian women jumped up and said, no, no, no. And they started slagging off what I'd said. And I said, you're a part of the problem. Millions of people got out. So that was a really brilliant thing. Cuba an example of one of the worst places on earth to live and one of the best places. And what they used to do, and I don't know if they do now, but I think they still do, they were exporters of health. So when Rwanda, in 1961, Rwanda took over Uganda, he bought 5,000 programs to train up foot doctors. And a foot doctor was somebody who would go out into the community and train people in health. And things, simple things like, if you're in the country, tie up the dogs at night, don't let them wander and defecate in the village because they spread disease. Use the nets and all sorts of things. Wash your hands. Don't defecate yourself near food. And they did that. And also they did basic health things. They could handle 80% of reasons you would be ill in Uganda. Largely an agrarian and a bush country. The health of the nation went through the roof. 20 years later, the AIDS virus hits. So if you look at Africa, you see the spread of AIDS, especially out of South Africa and all that, all over the place. And there it wasn't associated with gay communities, it was associated with unsafe sex amongst heterosexuals. If you look at Uganda, there's a big hole. Because when the government started issuing warnings, they'd already built a health service that had created social mobility, created social opportunity, created doctors and nurses and all that, so they could fall back on something, because the Cubans had supplied these 5,000 doctors for 3 months, trained them up. So there are wonderful examples all over the place. I could tell you countless ones. In America, in a place called Bakersfield, a psychologist, mental health doctor, was asked to get involved in homelessness there. And he noticed that all the providers around homelessness were all over the place. They weren't working together. So what he did was he got them all together, got the sheriff, got the library, got everybody together, got the community together. And they created something called Housing First, which is where instead of waiting for somebody to get all of the reasons of their poverty out of them, you give them a house, and then you give them wraparound support while they're in the house. And it's proved to be very useful. And especially in Scotland is doing it, Denmark's doing it, Norway's doing it, Finland's doing it. Sorry. Anyway, there are wonderful examples, and they're all over the place. I don't know them all, but I hope with the Ministry of Poverty Prevention, we bring them together and we converge their energies. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, if possible, we'll have one more question, and then if anybody has any burning ones, we can do those post-event anymore. Just go right there.
Hello, James. Sorry.
I wish. No, my question is basically, you've talked a lot about your background, Irish, Catholicism, almost this mid-century experience. Do you think there could be a Lord Bird in this decade or this century? Is your experience, can it be replicated by someone else, say a British Romanian that's migrated here in the last 10 years, or is your story just your story?
I didn't quite get that. Did you get it?
Do you want to...
Is your story, can it be replicated in the modern day by someone else?
Well, my story is really it's really a peculiarly historical story, which is about, because the Irish working class have kind of been dissipated and they've been absorbed. And my family were immigrants, and now we have different kinds of immigrants, Jamaican and, West Indian and all sorts of things like that. And they come with all sorts of other riches and also with all sorts of other problems. I think mine was not unique, but it was definitely a particular kind of immigration. It's very interesting. I saw a comedian the other day on YouTube, and he was an Irishman, and he was in America, and he said, you know what? He said, I got to America, and it was extraordinary, he says, because suddenly I'm a white guy. And I thought, I'm a white guy. I was just an ordinary white guy, and I looked like every other white guy. And he said, but I'm from Ireland, and I had to keep telling people I was from Ireland. But they looked at me and said, I'm a white guy. And he said, but the thing is that the Irish planted a lot of potatoes, but they planted them. They didn't go to another continent and raid people, steal them and sell them into slavery to plant the plants. And nor did they, when it came to harvesting them, go to a continent and enslave people. So it's kind of weird because there is a weirdness about Irish immigration because, as I was saying earlier, you've had almost 1,000 years of imperialism, British imperialism, when it was learning how to do it, and that doesn't mean to say you don't meet Irish racists. My mum was an Irish racist. She wasn't a socially progressive person. But you have this kind of weird immigration that, I'm here. I mean, I don't know if you remember Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott upset a lot of people. She's an MP. And I agreed with her 100%. She said, if you're black or you're Indian, you're black or Indian 24/7. You're there. You walk it, you don't know how people are going to take you. You go into a situation, somebody might be horrible to you, and you say, is this because I'm from Africa or India or whatever, or from the West Indies? If you're Jewish or you're Irish, you don't necessarily have that problem because, Jewish people often look like everybody else and Irish people look like everybody else. And it was a really interesting look at the different kinds of immigration. The biggest outburst of racial prejudice that Britain that happened in the 1930s, was when the people of Southall, this was before Indians had moved to Southall, hundreds of them, thousands of them met there to stop the Welsh walking up the highways from Wales to get jobs in London. It was an enormous, hundreds of people were injured, the police were involved. That was racism, that was white on white. Before, racism in England became about different colours, they started off with different religions and different things. It's a very, very interesting period. I've spoken, I remember when I was in the States, I used to try and work with a guy called Jesse Jackson. He was a brilliant person, but he wasn't always there, when you needed him. And he made the point, a really brilliant point about racism and about everything. He said there was a guy called Bird, no relationship of mine, a black guy, who was walking into town once in some little place in Alabama, and he was hitching. And 3 guys stopped their truck and said, if you want a lift, we'll give you one. Tied him to the back and dragged him into town, and he died. And Clinton, who was the president at the time, said, we're going to go for death sentence. And they asked Jesse Jackson, they said, what do you think about that? He said, well, he says, it's interesting, those three guys and the guy Bird, they all had something in common. They had no investment in the community. Not one of them had had a degree, not one of them had had education, not one of them had a library card, not one of them had a hope in hell of getting anything. And he said, and that there's a kind of harm upon harm. I hope I'm explaining this well enough. There's this harm of poor, black harm, hurting other black people or harming white people and all that stuff. And that's America. And he was making the point, and it just makes you think. I don't know if I'm telling, this is relevant, but I think there is a lot of stuff that we have to understand about where racism comes from and, the role that it plays. And it's a big fight. And we have to cleanse ourselves of this chauvinism because it divides and rules. I probably said too much now. Can I sing a song? Can I sing a song?
If you'd like to.
My children know this. Do you want to join in? Is she? Go on. The party's over. It's time to call it a day. They've burst your pretty balloon and taken the moon away. Now you must wake up. All dreams must end. Take off your makeup. The party's over, my friend. Thank you. I have spoken on many occasions, and I often do the singing at the end, and I've had a number of people come up to me and said, that was the best bit.
Thank you so much, Lord Bird, for joining us, and thank you, everybody, for coming. If you have any questions, please feel free to stay behind. I'm sure we can...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you guys so much. And would you please give Lord Bird one more round of applause?